Welcome to another Baby Brunch podcast. My name is Ilana, and we're very lucky to have an educational psychologist on the show today. We've actually had so much fun before this because I love me a psychologist because we have the best conversations. We can talk about our children and feelings and about them. And you know what? One day I want to also bring psychology, and I want to bring one of our psychiatrists back. We've done that before on Baby Brunch. Megan Tucker, welcome to Baby Brunch.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
It's only a pleasure. Now, I have had a few moms contact me about this one, and it's happened in my own home. My child is talking to themselves. First of all, do we call it a problem? Is it a problem for our children to talk to themselves?
So I actually don't, typically, yes, there are problems. You know, sometimes development does indicate problems, but what does a problem mean? So if I talk about it, I like to refer to it as typical or not developmentally appropriate.
Okay.
So I think maybe it's just a gentle perspective. Yes, most people do refer to it as a problem. When I did my research, I also looked at a problem. But I think when we are working with parents, we like to be sensitive because they are already meeting with you to discuss this problem that they've experienced. So to be sensitive, I like to refer to it as typical development or not necessarily appropriate for the developmental age or stage.
So when would it be appropriate? I mean, depending on if it's a 1-year-old or my toddler, you know, going into grade 1 or even in older kids, when is it considered a problem for children to talk to themselves, whether it be a whispered tone or even loudly?
So you have to consider the stage of development. It typically starts at the age of 3, between the ages of 3 and 7 years old.
Okay.
So when it could be problematic or no longer developmentally appropriate is if we look at excessive externalization. So what that means is if it's really loud in public or appears unusual, or can be distracting to the people around you or even to children in the classroom.
Okay.
Obviously, that relates more to when they are school going. But even prior to that, I think sometimes a mom just knows, something is off, or I've actually never seen this. And that's why I think that a podcast like this is so meaningful and intentional.
Thank you.
Because it just puts parents at ease and says, actually, this is okay, or maybe I should do further investigation. Sometimes it can also be concerning if it's negative content. So when children are very self-critical, or when it demonstrates intrusive thoughts. And that can typically point to low self-esteem, or even broader than that is anxiety. And then you also have to look at the dynamics in the home, you know, is mom self-critical? Because children learn through modeling, observing behavior, or is it something that the parents aren't aware of at all? When it's uncontrollable, so I think that closely relates to the excessive externalization, and then disruptive to daily functioning. So typically when we look at something as a problem, if we refer to it like that, we look at how is it impacting a child or the family's daily functioning.
So we have to look at which function does the action serve. If it's for self-regulation, then that's wonderful, right?
Yes.
Because instead of Boetie or Sissy fighting, they are just speaking to themselves and saying, self, I've got this.
Exactly.
You know? But if it's not for self-regulation, and if it, let's say, he is saying what they are observing, and it's negative,
Yes.
then perhaps it needs...
So if we use the negative self-talk as an example,
Right.
very often it can give you an indication of how a child's thinking and how a child is problem solving. And then you can ask yourself, what are they observing within their environment? What are they learning? And then to reflect. So when you speak to your child, not to say the way you're speaking to yourself is wrong. You don't want to unintentionally make a child feel like they are bad or that what they are doing is wrong. So what you can say is gently guide. I observed that you said that you didn't do this well or that you can't draw. Very often, you know, children will say, I can't draw and I just can't get this right. Then you can intervene and gently say, I heard that you say you can't do this. Are you battling with this? Rephrase.
Okay.
are you experiencing this as a little bit challenging? And then offer alternatives. Would you like to try something else? Or can I help? Because instead of saying, this is too difficult, just leave it because you're getting frustrated, you're also taking the problem away. And as much as I think as parents, you want to protect your children and put them in a bubble and keep them safe, you have to ask yourself, what purpose does this serve? And what am I teaching my child? So you want to teach your children problem-solving skills so that they can navigate life independently and with confidence. So the way you manage these perhaps challenges that you face at such a very young age, you're teaching them such important skills. How to problem solve, how to navigate. How do I think about myself when I approach a complex task? So then once you intervene, you hope to then see, oh, this is difficult. Let me try something else. And you will be amazed at children are sponges. And I think sometimes it actually makes me emotional to see what children absorb and how they then reflect. And especially if it's made an impact, how powerful that guidance can be.
When our children talk to themselves, does it deserve a punishment?
When we look at punishment, I have a preference, a personal preference as a mother, and based on what research has told me. And I think my preference is for discipline as opposed to punishment. Because often punishment can leave a child feeling like they're a bad child. And it can be harmful to their self-esteem and their ego and their development.
I've got goosebumps as you said that. Oh.
When we look at discipline, there's a specific goal in mind and you're addressing a certain behavior. And at the end of the day, you're teaching them something, appropriate or inappropriate behavior. This is correct for the environment or this isn't. So when I work with my parents, I say, tell me, what is the purpose or what is your understanding around punishment? And when I rephrase punishment to discipline, it's really it just almost like a whole new understanding of what is my goal? What am I trying to achieve? Sometimes punishment comes from a place of frustration, a person feeling out of control. But when we discipline, we're teaching, we're guiding, we're equipping with tools to regulate, tools to problem solve. And ultimately, that goes much further than a punishment. I do think if we're going to use the term punishment, because let's be realistic, sometimes the words are used interchangeably and very rightfully so. But you can discipline with a specific goal in mind where you haven't behaved according to, what we know is right and wrong. So maybe a timeout is required. If you think that a discipline strategy is appropriate for certain behavior, then ask yourself the question, self-talk. Have that inner conversation first to say, when I implement this strategy, what am I trying to achieve? If we are specifically looking at self-talk or regulation, what alternative can I then use to teach alternative behavior or more adaptive behavior? So when we look at adaptive functioning, I always tell my clients there's no right or wrong way. There's effective and ineffective. Or if you give a response or you respond, is that the best possible way you can problem solve?
Okay.
Yes.
Hearing you speak with such reassurance, it's so wonderful. Information is so wonderful. Would an educational psychologist such as yourself be the right expert to visit if moms and dads would like information about self-regulation, or I'm struggling with discipline, I used the trigger phrase this week on the radio when I was explaining the scenario. I said, my child is so rude, So that we can all relate to that. It makes you almost jolt,
Yes.
Is an educational psychologist the right expert to go and see when that is your struggle?
Yes. So, yes, but not limited to.
Right.
So an educational psychologist would be appropriate because we work with child development, essentially. I think sometimes there's a misconception or misunderstanding that the educational component is only academic related.
Right.
However, we work with child development. So we look at everything holistically. We look at social development, emotional development, yes, if appropriate, academic progress. And then as well as how is the family functioning? Because ultimately, we can work with a child, but that only brings about so much change. When we can work with a family and bring about change within the system, that goes a lot further, because essentially a child or an adolescent or a baby will only see us once a week, but they're living within the family setting 24/7. If that is that is the scenario. But then there are other resources available as well. Teachers, pediatricians, counselors. Typically when you study psychology, you will have a general overview of child development, adolescent development, adult development, and then you decide where you specialize in. So if that is an area of speciality, then yes.
Who should our children speak to about their feelings? And at what age do they start sharing? Are they sharing all the time and we're just missing their cues?
So I read a little post on social media not so long ago that said, sometimes children slow us down, but maybe that's the point. So that just made me think of that when you were asking, are they sharing all the time? But maybe we're missing it. I think it's valuable and it can be reassuring if your child is sharing with you, because it is testament to your availability to them, your emotional availability, and their level of comfort, that my parent, my caregiver, my sibling is listening to me and they're available. And very often, the nighttime talks, when they're ready to talk, when they've worked through the day of regulation and now they're ready to share. In our circumstances, you're available, dad's available. So yes, I think if they can speak to a teacher that they feel comfortable with, as long as they're speaking to someone,
right,
and that someone, whoever it may be, can give them appropriate guidance, or guidance that allows for self-development, or to rephrase and say, what is the best possible way that I can handle this situation? And I think when you ask the question, I think at what age should they start sharing? As soon as they start learning that vocabulary. So my daughter said to me the other day, and I feel nervous. And I was like, but you're only 3. And then I said, let's go with it. Let's go with it, because you've said it.
Yeah.
Maybe you are feeling nervous. Maybe it's just that you want to stay at home, but that also is telling me something. And I said, I just reassured her and I normalized it. And I said, it's okay to sometimes feel nervous. I didn't say, no, you're not feeling nervous. I said, it's okay to sometimes feel nervous. And I normalized and I said, sometimes I feel nervous.
I feel nervous, yeah.
And then the next morning, on the way to school, she said to me, Mom, today, don't be nervous. You'll be fine and you'll see me later. So she was ready to internalize and she was ready to accept that vocabulary and that reflection at the age of 3. So whenever they're ready, whenever they're available to that vocabulary or that feeling, and even if they don't always share with words, they share with behavior. So if they're sharing with behavior, then say, like I mentioned earlier, name it. And they will correct you. They'll say, that's not how I'm feeling. And then we can try something else. And sometimes they are at the age where they can accept it. And sometimes if you can just acknowledge and reflect the behavior, that'll give them all the reassurance and the guidance that they need, as well, that I'm being seen and I'm being heard, because ultimately that's what our children are asking, to be seen and heard.
Megan Tucker, thank you so much for joining us, our educational psychologist that works with children and adolescents. You can find out more about Megan Tucker and the rest of the team on douglasdaletherapycentre.co.za. Also, we are putting up her biography together with a clickable link if you want to see anyone of the team and consult with them. And this is live on babybrunch.co.za. douglasdaletherapycentre.co.za. Visit them and look for Megan Tucker.